Dr. Richard Harris joining us today, and we get to talk about something that I think you and I both are passionate about and find so fascinating. You're a lifestyle medicine doctor here in Houston. You also have an MBA, so you're a big thinker. Dr. Harris, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me again, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
We are talking about what the Bible says about healing, health, and wellness. And it says so much, does it not? I mean, it's really an impressive book from so many facets. But when you start looking at what it says about healing and wellness and nutrition, it's pretty amazing.
It is, and this is kind of a long journey for me because I was always interested in science as a kid, but I've been a Christian since before I can remember. I grew up in the church. My grandfather was a minister. So I can't remember not being a Christian. I also can't remember not being interested in science. And it was a hard dichotomy for me for a long time because most people who are scientific are not religious. And I had to really struggle to balance it. And then one time I had this thought that, well, God's the master scientist. And then it all made sense. And I was able to reconcile, the two halves of me, the science side and the religious side. And then I was sitting in church one day and I felt the Spirit call me to talk about what the Bible says about health. And I'm no theologian or anything like that. So I said, okay, God, I'll follow. And I just sat down, started reading, looked online for verses, and saw that there's so much. Like, He gave us the blueprint for how to be healthy. And I think one of the reasons why there's so much disease today is because we've gotten away from all the things that God told us to do that were beneficial for our health.
Let's start with fasting because it is mentioned dozens of times in the Bible. And I feel like uh, I grew up in the church as well. We used to joke growing up if the church doors were open, my mother had us there. I mean, we were in church several times a week from the time I was born. My kids go to Christian school, and we try and have them in church as much as possible as well, reading the book. And um, so that's kind of my background with Christianity. But I also think I enjoy studying the Bible and Christianity and theology. And this concept of fasting, you can't escape it in when you read the Bible. And then you can't escape fasting when you start looking into healing modalities here today. So when you start combining those things, I mean, you really start asking the question, what is the true power of fasting and why isn't that more discussed today, both in Christianity and in medicine, frankly?
hmm Yeah, we talk about fasting in Christianity as more of a sacrifice, right? As a way for us to do something hard that God tells us to do and that we be rewarded for that. Matthew 6:16 through 18 talks about that. Now, when you look at fasting from a scientific perspective, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can do intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, or you could do what I do, which is periodic fasting. Every Sunday, I fast for 24 hours, and every quarter, I do a 48-hour fast. And that's water and electrolytes because I still maintain activity. When you look at the data, fasting has been linked to lowering in blood pressure, lowering in blood sugars, improving cholesterol, improvements in mood, improvements in memory and cognition. There's a lot of really encouraging data from both human and animal studies on the benefits of fasting. And I think it's also what we don't talk about in studies is it's doing hard things because you can't go more than 3 minutes in today's world without finding calories. Food is everywhere. It's just is. It's part of our social milieu. It's part of our culture is food. And delaying gratification is something that a lot of people don't have these days, and it causes problems. So fasting stretches your willpower muscles. It helps you to delay gratification. It helps you achieve something hard. Most of us want to do the easy things. We don't want to do hard things anymore. But doing hard things is what makes you grow. It stretches you. It prepares you for the tough times in life. And then you look at fasting from what we call hormesis. Hormesis is basically doing things that put the body under controlled amounts of stress, like exercise, actually make us more resilient. It makes us stronger. And I believe that fasting is one of the best hormetic stressors out there, and it's extremely beneficial for brain health as well, from what we're seeing in animal models and some human studies as well. So, there are people who shouldn't fast. It's not for everyone, but in general, if you are looking for something to do to improve your overall health, improve your willpower, improve your connection with our Father, I suggest you start doing some fasting.
Let me ask you this. I heard a podcast a while back, and a doctor was saying, in his opinion, he didn't think most Americans today were healthy enough to fast. What do you think about that?
I think it's like anything. I look at fasting like exercise, right? If you've never exercised in your life, you probably shouldn't get off your couch and try to go run a marathon or deadlift 600 pounds and you've never exercised before. I think fasting is something that should be done over time where you break into it slowly. That's how I did it. So I started with a 2 hour window and then a 4 hour and then 6 hour, then eight, and worked my way up to the longest I've ever done was 5 days. And that was water and electrolytes. I also took a multivitamin at that point because I was still exercising, so I wanted to make sure I didn't run into nutrient deficiencies. I think that if you look at the data on intermittent fasting, most of these studies are done in people who are insulin resistant or who are obese or
Mhm.
who are diabetic, and they're showing improvement. So fasting can be done safely for most people. I really only worry about it with people who have eating disorders. They probably shouldn't fast because they already have disordered eating. And then people who have malabsorption syndrome, so things like celiac, things like Crohn's disease, these can cause and exacerbate already existing nutrient deficiencies. So you want to make sure if you have a malabsorption syndrome that you're correcting your nutrient deficiencies before fasting. Other times is people who are really under a lot of stress. And I'm talking people who have had a lot of adverse childhood trauma, right, or people who have gone through really traumatic events. Probably not the time to start fasting right after that until you've started to heal from that trauma,
Mhm.
from the psychological work and the mindset. And then you can start incorporating that fasting slowly.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but it's something that I guess you might want to talk about with some sort of healthcare provider before you start, if you've never done it. Although I do the intermittent fasting, and I think I didn't just one day wake up and go, okay, I'm not going to eat till noon. Like, I stretched it out. So at first I didn't eat breakfast until 10, and then maybe I had a little something at 11, or maybe I like made my breakfast much smaller until I definitely worked up to that. And with my fasting, that works for me. However, if I start to have, especially after the holidays or something like that, and I've eaten poorly, I need to do like a reset for my gut. And so a lot of times that will involve a fast for maybe 2 or 3 days, to where I just don't need to eat anything and let my stomach heal for me to then feel better. And so I think it makes just a huge difference. And I don't know if you've ever listened to Derek Prince. He was a preacher from, he died in 2003, so many years ago. But I listened to his stuff honestly on YouTube, but he talks about, or he would talk about in his sermons, that he would fast every Wednesday. And he did that for much of his adult life. And then during different times of, issues or things like that, he might stop. And he said he noticed that his life would fall apart much worse when he stopped the fasting on Wednesdays. So there is something to this. It's hard to even explain until you've fasted and you realize, yeah, it clears out your gut or what have you, but mentally, it's really amazing what it does to you. I mean, it really, you think so clearly.
Yep, and that's the ketosis, right? So when people would fast and reach enlightenment, it's because they would start making ketones. Ketones are another fuel source. They're a cleaner burning fuel source, and in people who have insulin resistance or are unable to efficiently use glucose or sugar for fuel, most of them can still use ketones. And so when you are in ketosis, you typically feel very energized. You typically feel very sharp. And that is one of the main benefits of fasting, in my opinion, is helping to switch that metabolism from a majority glucose metabolism to a lipid or fat metabolism, which allows you to utilize those ketones for fuel. There's a concept called metabolic flexibility, which is just that, being able to burn sugar and burn fat equally as well. I do the periodic fasting, one of the reasons is for that metabolic flexibility. So my body is able to flip the switch, and that way I can eat relatively equal amounts of fat and carbohydrate, or sometimes I'll eat more fat, sometimes I'll eat more carbohydrate, and I don't feel bad. Because it used to be that if I ate too much fat, I would feel really bad because I wasn't eating that much fat. But then when I started to increase my healthy fats, decrease my carbohydrates, and I'll stress it sometimes. Some days I'll eat a lot of good fats just to kind of stress my system. Some days I'll eat a lot of carbohydrates just to stress my system. Some days I'll eat a ton of protein. And I just do that for that metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, and it definitely works. Yeah, I was reading some of the Bible verses about fasting. I think you mentioned Matthew. Um, Let me see if I wrote that down. Was it 6:18? When the Bible talks about whenever you fast, don't put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance, so they will be noticed by men when they're fasting. Truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. Your fasting basically goes on to say will be noticed by God. So, and Moses fasted, Jesus fasted, Daniel fasted. Let's talk about Daniel, actually, the Daniel fast. I know that's a popular one for people when they're trying to lose weight, where it really just focuses on what fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, those type things.
Yeah, the Daniel fast is basically going to a more plant based approach, and I'm okay doing that. Um, I don't typically like people to be plant based on their own for extended periods of time
Okay.
because there's a lot of problems you can run into with nutrient deficiencies, right? Anytime you get a more restrictive nutrition plan, you really need to plan for it and work with someone who is well versed and making sure that you're getting all the right nutrients when you're on a restrictive plan. But the Daniel fast can be very enlightening for people because what's on it? It's whole foods,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so if you're coming from someone who's eating Burger King and McDonald's every day, multiple times a day, and then all of a sudden you go on a whole food nutrition plan, which is the Daniel fast, you're going to notice some changes, and those changes can occur pretty quickly. There was a study came out a couple years ago where they had people eat a whole food plan and then a processed food plan, and they were pretty much equated in calories and macronutrients, but people could eat as they wanted to. The people who ate the processed food plan tended to eat 500 more calories per day, and they ended up gaining a little bit of weight. The people who didn't lost a little bit of weight. And so just switching over to whole foods, that's the most important part about nutrition. 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, your calories should be from whole foods, single ingredient foods, foods of the earth, foods that God gave us, and 20% can be, your discretionary processed food, your confectionaries, your cereals, whatever.
Well, and you brought up an interesting point. So, the foods that God gave us, not what man gave us, right? Not something that's ultra processed. I know we talk about ultra processed foods so much in this society now, and just that's even if you're not someone who's willing to fast, even that switch makes a monumental difference in your health. Just observing what did God put here for us to eat. I always tell my kids, if you can't stumble upon it in nature, in a forest or wherever, you probably shouldn't be putting it in your body.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue is that we have taken food and then we transform it chemically and with heat, and it removes a lot of the nutrients. It also makes it into a form that's more palatable. I always tell people, grab a bag of potato chips. How fast can you eat that bag? Really fast. If I
Yeah.
give you a bag of broccoli, how fast are you eating a bag of broccoli? Not that fast,
Yeah.
right? So you're going to feel more full, more satiated with the broccoli because it has fiber, it has nutrients that help with detoxification. Whereas the potato chips are just basically a load of fat and salt and sugar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we I think that eating from the fruits of the earth is very very important for our overall health, and studies show this. When you keep your processed food intake below 20%, there's two studies that came out recently that show that you decrease your risk of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline.
Wow.
So again, that falls in the 80-20 rule. We know that for every 10% increase in ultra processed food you eat, you have a 14% increased risk of all cause mortality, which is basically during a study period, what are the chances you're alive or dead? That's basically what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So the more processed food you eat, the more likely you are to have what a lot of people would call premature death.
Mhm.
So it's one of the easiest, simplest interventions, which is why I love things like the Daniel fast, because it gets people into eating more whole foods and learning how their bodies feel when they eat whole foods.
Well, and that's really what it's all about. I mean, at the end of the day, you're just going to feel so much better. You're going to think more clearly when you're eating real foods that your body can translate into information. Because when you're putting the potato chip in there, I mean, it just doesn't translate what a real potato would, or a vegetable or fruit, things like that. Um, and I know you do a lot of what you call lifestyle medicine, and I like that term because it's not just what we're putting in our body, in our mouth. It's also our ears and our eyes and our thoughts that all come into play with health. And so I love from Philippians 4:8, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, things of good rapport, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So that's controlling your thoughts. And the Bible talks, that's just one example, you know that, but the Bible talks so much about preventing sin and controlling our thoughts. And that's all that plays into health as well.
Absolutely, it does. Your thoughts determine your actions. And it even says in Proverbs 17:22, a joyful heart is good medicine. I mean, you could just leave it at that,
Mhm.
right? God
Right.
is literally telling us that a joyful heart is medicine. And studies back this up. Optimists and studies live 11 to 15% longer. Did you know that there are syndromes where people can get so emotionally distraught it changes their literal function? There's
Wow.
one called Takotsubo's, and this is a syndrome. It's called broken heart syndrome, where literally you go through an event so traumatic, and the result is your heart function drops. There's something called conversion syndrome. People, this typically happens in people who have a history of depression or anxiety or some other mental health issue.
Mhm.
They come in thinking that they're blind. They literally, to them, they can't see. But then you test that eye functions completely fine. All right. So our physical thoughts can manifest themselves as a symptom or an illness. And I think this is something so powerful. People believe it's hooey, but there are people who are extremely psychosomatic, meaning their thoughts determine their function. And we know this because, again, if it was just about thoughts, why would there be physical changes? Why would optimists live longer? Why would outcomes be worse after a cardiovascular event if you have depression or
Well,
anxiety or something like that?
or placebo effect.
Yes, placebo effect. Like, people get blown away when I tell them, if you look at, there's one intervention across all different types of illnesses or diseases or states that works for just about everything,
Mhm.
and it's placebo. I mean, you can
So it
find a
is
randomized
so
control
true. Yeah.
trial and show all the placebo things show an effect. So there's the placebo effect, and you can even do it where they've done trials where they gave people a placebo, they told them it was a sugar pill, and they said, "But I believe this will help you." And the thought that it will help me, this is the belief effect, actually causes things to move where it actually does help you. You see improvement. So power, the ability to have positive thoughts and to see the world in a different view. Don't look at things as losses. Look at them as opportunities for growth. The whole growth mindset.
Sure.
These things are so important for our overall health. And I have a friend who runs a cancer center, and we were talking about this one day. He does holistic treatments for cancer, and he works with people as oncologists. And he said, Richard, I no longer call them miracle cases anymore. The people with stage four, who told they're going to be dead in 3 months. He said, I was like, well, what do you call them? He's like, they're just cases now. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, these people who survive, and he's got the data to back this up. It's not the chemo, it's not the cancer. It is, do they form a new identity around the belief that their body can heal itself? He said that is the number one thing from his center, based upon his data, the number one aspect. And it's so true. All of these miracle cases I've ever seen had one thing in common. They had a firm belief that the fight wasn't over and that anything could happen and they could get better.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much around the placebo effect that's so fascinating. And if you have children, you know about the placebo effect because the instant you put a band aid on a child, they're healed. They're fine. No more pain. I mean, it's instant. It is literally like that. I mean, my 3-year-old fell off his little tricycle earlier, skinned his knee, and I said, "Do we need a band aid?" And he said, "Yes, absolutely." And I mean, he knows that it's amazing to watch that. But I do believe so much of our attitude determines our life. And look, unfortunate things happen. There's no question about that. But there's some people who are a little bit better able, it seems like, to handle these challenges that come their way. And I like what Rumi said. I'm trying to think of the exact quote. It said, "There aren't obstacles on our path, the obstacles are the path." And so when you start to look at it from that vantage, and that quote means different things I've found to different people, but if you start to look at those things as opportunities and they're what route you through life, then you just have a different take on things.
Absolutely. John 16:33, right? I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And I think about things, I'm like, okay, Jesus had people not like him. Jesus went through struggle. If he went through all of that, I'm definitely going to go through that. But then it's how do I have the strength to endure? And one of the things I pray for is I don't pray for an easy life. I pray for the strength, the faith, and the guidance to make my life easy no matter what I go through. Right.
Let's
And
talk
and
about,
that's
continue.
yeah, I was just gonna say, and that's related to your mindset, right? Because one of the things that I've noticed over, my life, and I'm almost 40 now, is as you get older, you're constantly getting more and more and more and more out of life. But that means life is going to take more and more and more away from you, and it's not going to get easier. So you have to steel yourself. You have to prepare yourself. You have to have the right mindset and realize that, hey, I've had a great life. It might not have been perfect. I've been able to help people. I've been able to do this, that, and whatever, and be joyful for what you have been able to do.
Yeah, and you're working unto the Lord, not unto people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about fear too, because it says all throughout the Bible over and over and over and over, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. And in a variety of ways, it says do not fear. Fear is a mindset as well. And look, we live in a world that, is constantly giving you things to fear, but you don't always have to take those in and internalize those and live by those. And I just think there's a lot to health when you get to a point in your life where you go, yeah, there's going to be things around me that are calling me to feel fear, but I'm not going to bite. I'm not going to take the bait.
Absolutely. And this is there's a couple things here. One, be careful of who you're around. Be careful of what comes into your ears. Be careful of who you listen to as far as where you get your information from. Because as you know, when you turn on the news, it's always murder this and
Sure.
robbery that. And,
Yeah.
and these stories are there because of our negative bias. You remember negative information stronger than positive
Mhm.
information. News media, they know this, so they want to hook you, right?
Mhm.
They need their ratings. And, it is what it is. But you have to steel your mind. Most people, if you talk to them, they think that we live in the end times right now. They think the world is all topsy turvy, horrible. And I'm like, do you guys realize this is the safest it's ever been to be a human?
Mhm.
And it's not even close. Not even close. I mean, look at our life expectancy now compared to where it was in 1900. Do you realize that minorities have more opportunities than ever? Women have more opportunities than ever, right? Kids can
Yeah.
go online and literally learn anything. I saw a 9-year old graduated high school the other day, right? We live in a world of so much abundance, but if you get your news and your information, or if you're around the wrong people, you're going to think that everything is all bad. I'm like, no, there's still so much good and positivity
Well,
in this world. Look at what happened after Harvey. I mean, the whole city came together like I've never seen before. And it was a time of tremendous hurt, but it was also a time of tremendous beauty because it showed you what we can do as humans if we work together towards a common goal. Black, white, Hispanic, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever. It didn't matter. It didn't matter at that point in time. It was just, we're Houstonians and we're going to ride together and we're going to figure this out and we're going to help each other. And that's what life should be about. And you really have to be careful with fear and anxiety. The Bible does talk about this. And it really, it says, okay, you can't control the future. So why worry about something you can't control? What I think is really interesting, when you look at the data and you look at something called locus of control, which is basically, am I the captain of my own ship, right? Am I in control of my destiny? Christians actually have a higher locus of control. You're like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to make sense, because you're talking about someone else being in control of your life.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, it actually does make sense, because I'm in control because I give my control to God and I know He's going to point me in the right direction. So there's less fear, there's less anxiety, there's more sense of purpose, there's more drive, there's more meaning. So I always tell people, anxiety really at the root stems from you're trying to control something you have no control over. So zoom out, take a look. What can I control? What can I not control? You probably can't control most of what happens to you. In a given day, what can you really control? What clothes I wear, what I eat sometimes, right? You may be on the go. You might not have all those options available. What can you control? How I react and how I think about my environment. That's 100% under your control. And so that is what I tend to focus on. When bad things happen to me, I just let it go. I mean, I can't do anything about it, right?
Mhm.
I
Right.
can control how I feel about it. I can control my thoughts. I can control how I act going forward. And that's what I focus on. And that is how you master that fear and that anxiety, by being more present in the moment instead of thinking about a nebulous future where you have no idea what's going to happen.
Well, and to build on that, I think, and the Bible talks about this all throughout, having a grateful heart, being grateful. When you start looking, I believe in life, whatever you look for, you're going to find. So if you're looking for the negativity, you're going to find it. You'll find it. If you're looking for positivity and good things and what have you, I think you're more likely to attract that, and you're going to find it in life. No one's life's perfect. If you're looking for the perfect journey, easy, it doesn't exist. And you know what? Maybe it's better that way. I mean, maybe we slide into home base or whatever in this life, and we're dirty and sweaty, and maybe that's how it's supposed to be. It was an experience. But the Bible talks so much about gratitude, and I think that also factors into your overall health and well-being as well when you start looking for things to be thankful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that Jesus was a carpenter, because what do carpenters do? They build. They acquire new skills and they build and they grow and they create, right? And that's a metaphor for life. You go on, you build, you grow, you create. Sometimes things aren't going to go your way. Sometimes you're going to be in the mud, but you keep going. And you have to go down into the dirt to build the foundation to get above the ground and in the sky. I think that's a really cool metaphor. But back to being generous. Proverbs 16:24, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. And it's so important because now we have data on gratitude and everything that gratitude does for us. When you're thinking about gratitude, or if you're instituting a gratitude practice, you want to think about things that you're grateful for, but you also want to think about times in that day that people were grateful that you were there. And I use tell this to people all the time. I love my mom, but she's a miserable shrew. She's just not. She's just one of those people that's unhappy, and she's always been unhappy. And I don't ever know if she'll ever be happy. And one of the times she was talking about stuff and how hard her life is and all this other stuff, and I told her, Mom, when was the last time someone was grateful that you were there? She couldn't answer me, and I said, this is why you're miserable. You've made life all about you and your problems, and you've forgotten our calling to be out there and be a good neighbor and help others.
Mhm.
And she kind of thought about it for a second. She was like, you're right. And so I wake up every day. I say three things I'm grateful for, and I pray for the person that day that I don't miss it, that God's put in my path that I'm supposed to help. And I pray for one person every single day that I am supposed to help. and God, show me that person clearly so I don't miss it. And since I've started doing that, my life has changed tremendously. It's opportunity after opportunity, it's growth after growth. It's just been amazing. And that's not to say bad things don't happen. I got a text this morning from a really good friend of mine that his uncle died of a heart attack, right? And you feel for that because he's a good friend. He's a good guy. He's a great guy. I love this guy. He's my MBA classmate. We went through a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I was talking to him about it, and he's positive and he's upbeat, and he's focusing on all the gratitude and gracious things that his uncle had taught him, and how he's going to carry on his uncle's legacy through his hard work and dedication, things that his uncle was really important to his uncle. And I think that's how we all should strive to be. I know it's tough, but that's the point where you really feel secure in your relationship with those around you and your relationship with God.
So, and again, building kind of on that as well. One of my favorite Bible verses talks about death and life and the power of the tongue. I tell this to my kids all the time too. Be very careful what you hear, what you see, and what you say. And I think you're manifesting your life by what you think and hear and say. It's what you bring into your realm, so to speak, into your universe. And so the Bible talks so much about that. And again, I know with your lifestyle medicine, that plays into things too. What are you talking about? And I have to tell this story because I always say that there were two most important dates I've ever gone on. And of course, one was with my husband, but the other one was with a guy, and I can't even remember his name. But I arrived to the date. I was a reporter in Minneapolis at the time. I arrived to the date. He said, "How's your day been?" And I said, "Oh, I had a terrible story today, and my boss this, and traffic." And he just stopped me and said, "No one likes to hear complaining all the time. No one wants to be around those type people. No one likes negative people." And it, initially was, oh my gosh, am I that bad? But it was, and look, that's kind of brave to say to someone on a first date that you don't even know. He didn't ask me for a second date, by the way, but it changed my life. And I'm so thankful that he had the courage to go, nobody wants to be around that. And like in the days and the weeks and the months after that, and obviously, 20 years later, I'm still talking about it. Like that was a blessing that he said. And I had a tendency to be a negative person. And I think over the years, me having changed that has helped immensely in me being a happy, better person.
Hmm. And I think life is beautiful. And I think when you zoom out, you see that there's so many good things that happen. And, what we do is we have 99 good things happen to us and one bad thing. And that one bad thing is what we sit on, right? But I tell people it's like this. Okay, if I gave you $100 and I took $1 back, are you going to be happy that you have $99? Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Right.
focus on the 99 and not the one,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let God focus on the one. That's his job. We
Mm-hmm.
should focus on all of the blessings that we have in life and really take a moment to speak life into that. I always say out loud that I am blessed. I've had a fantastic life. I've gotten to do things, amazing things, wonderful things. I've gotten to travel. People put their lives in my hands. But has it been easy? No. Have there been horrific things that have happened to me? Absolutely. Do I have my own health struggles? Yeah, I've been in chronic pain since I was 13 years old. Most people don't know it because I don't act like it. If you see me out and I'm in pain, I'm not going to sit there and complain about my pain. I'm going to enjoy some of the company of the people I'm around because I know that that's good for me and good for my soul. And eventually, when I stop thinking about the pain, it goes away. And so, what we should do is verbalize our blessings, verbalize what the Lord has given us. Use that positivity and don't just keep it in your head. Speak it out, and then speak life in the people around you. Are you a life giver, or are you a energy vampire? Right? Because if you're an energy vampire, first people are not going to want to be around you, and you're always going to be run down. But if you speak life into people, God will continuously overflow your cup so that your abundance overflows on others. And this is something that I found in my life. I'm always trying to speak life into people. And because of that, my cup has remained more than full. I have more than I could ever want or need or deserve.
Amen to that. I agree. I'm right there with you. All right, let's talk now about meditation. I feel like this is sort of a thorny issue in the Christian community. I hear some people go, no, Christians should not meditate. And then I hear some, and I'm kind of on the other opposite side that think that there's value in it because it does say to meditate on the word of God in the Bible. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people are like, well, if it comes from another religion, I don't want any part of it. And I'm like, well, why? There can be some good things that have come from other religions. There could be
Mm-hmm.
lessons that you learn. Like I read Stoic works, and I like a lot of things that Buddhists say about and the way that they articulate things, and it's
Yes.
thought provoking. So I'm not
Yes.
just going to throw it out just because they're not Christian. I think that's a disservice to what you can learn. And I spent a lot of time around other religions. I had a buddy who was Mormon. He would have little prayer groups, and I would go because I wanted to learn. And I had a buddy who was Muslim, and so I would go with him and learn about how they see things and how they see the world and their faith. And I think that made me a stronger Christian because I was able to be that good neighbor. Right? It doesn't. The Bible doesn't say just treat other Christians with respect. That's not just my neighbor. It's everybody, right? And you're supposed to show the love and the grace of Jesus Christ to all. And so, how am I going to do that if I don't go hang out with them and learn what they learn and be what they are? So, um, I think that if you're, I think it's one of the things you have to listen to the Spirit and listen to what God is calling you to do. If you don't feel comfortable, like the Spirit is telling you not to do meditation in a secular way, then just meditate on the Word of God. I do both. And so when I meditate on the Word of God, I think about the principles of God. I think about grace and mercy. I think about victory. I think about forgiveness. I think about the strength of God and Him fighting His battles or fighting my battles for me. So I will meditate on those principles, and I'll just say a couple words, kind of like a chant or a mantra that I believe are resonate the principles of God. But if you're someone who wants to do another form of meditation or mindfulness, maybe it's yoga, right? Because
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
data, you look at the data on yoga, you get this about the same effect as you do with meditation. You get it with prayer. So if you don't want to meditate, pray for that time period. The data is pretty similar on the benefits. Or you can do something like just being present in the moment. Have a gratitude practice, and that could also be your form of mindfulness. And having gratitude aligns with our principles as Christians. So there's no right way to meditate. There's no wrong way to meditate. You just figure out what aligns with you, your value system, and what God has called you to do.
Yeah, for me, being a busy mom of five, I need those 5 minutes or a couple minutes a day. I can't say I always get 5 minutes, but that's always my goal to sit down, think about nothing, just focus on my breath. I kind of need that time to clear out everything. And so for me, that works. And I know that may not be something everybody's comfortable with, but again, I need that kind of time of just nothingness, just quiet, me breathing, me focusing on the breathing and kind of clear out the cobwebs and the stress and anxiety and angst. And you're running and gunning with kids. That's just part of life. And so that certainly works for me. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add? I know that you're passionate about this topic.
Yeah, I think the breath work is something that we can do as Christians and feel okay with it because God put breath in our nostrils.
And he
So,
breathed this world or spoke this world into existence. So
right,
speaking, breathing, all the things that are talked about in the Bible are important. Yeah.
right. Anything God did or made cannot possibly be bad for us, right? If it comes from God, if God breathed life into us, then our breath mirrors what his will is for us. And that's why if you look at the data on breath work, it's pretty remarkable on what you can do with breath work and reducing stress and not only perceived stress, but actually physiologically markers of stress. And I like physiological sighing, basically where you take a breathe in through your nose and then take another rapid nose breath after that. So it's like, and then you breathe out through your mouth and do that for a couple minutes and you will feel your stress wither away. And in between that, if you want to, you can meditate on the word of God. You can do both at the same time. But I don't see, from my perspective, anything that's anti, Christian about doing breath work.
I agree. I agree. And look, I feel like when you're whole and healthy, you're a better Christian, you're a better person, you're a better servant on this earth. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. So, Dr. Harris, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always so wonderful to talk to you. I certainly appreciate it.
You're welcome, Lauren. Thank you so much. And to all your listeners, y'all have a blessed day.